Hello, and welcome to the Exponential Growth Podcast, powered by Analyst Investors. I'm your host, David Olivencia, co-founder of Analyst Investors, and a passionate advocate for leveraging innovation and technology to drive success. In this podcast, we'll dive into the strategies that top leaders, investors, and entrepreneurs are using to navigate and thrive in this era of accelerating technological change. Whether you're looking to lead more effectively, make smarter investments, or understand how to harness disruptive technologies for exponential growth, this podcast is for you. Each episode will feature conversations with visionary thinkers, industry pioneers, and innovative leaders who are redefining what's possible in today's rapidly evolving world. So if you're ready to start and stay ahead of this curve, let's get started. This is Exponential Growth. All right, everyone. Well, hey, let's welcome to another edition and episode of the Exponential Growth Podcast. Today we have a special guest, somebody I've known a good 4 or 5 years or so through some board service that I do, and family and friends, and is really doing some amazing stuff that we're gonna find out more about and dig into here. Welcome to the podcast, Anthony Shers.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
All right. Well, we're gonna expose our audience to all the great things that you got cooking, and the interesting life story and your startup, and amazing view that you have on technology in the future and whatnot. But with all these podcasts, Anthony, I'd like to start out with just let's give our audience a little bit about you. Kind of growing up, started, and then just kind of how your journey's been.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm from South Bend, Indiana, so home of Notre Dame, your alma mater.
There you go. All right.
And I like to think that's what brought us together. I did not actually go there, but I'm a lifelong fan. So Notre Dame, very important to the town I grew up in, and a lot of my teachers, family, friends, and stuff. The university is super important and touched us in a lot of ways. Actually went to high school on the East Coast, went to a boarding school, and then went to Brown University for college, where I studied economics. But I'd say I spent most of my time in college focused on track. So as a runner, and most of my time was spent trying to run the fastest mile I could. And we can get into that, but I would say in terms of the lessons I've learned around leadership and business, I would say most of it is from college, but it was from my experience trying to run as fast as I could versus the classes I took. After college, moved out to Austin, Texas, studying econ. Obviously, I had a lot of friends going into finance or consulting, but for whatever reason, I was drawn to startups. So joined a small startup out here in Austin. And what the company was doing is, this was in 2012, so it was kind of on the heels of Twitter getting announced at South by Southwest. And my startup was part of the Twitter ecosystem. The big trend at that time was social everything. And so
it was booming. Social was booming right then. That was like a big boom of social. Yeah,
that's right. So what that startup did is, basically, if you were a brand or a network, so some of our big customers were the television networks, and you wanted to show user-generated content in kind of a brand-safe way, meaning you could apply the filters on top of the tweets or whatever public posts on Facebook you wanted to show. My startup would power that, and so we had little widgets that you could embed on your website. There's an analytics tool. So if you were watching The Voice on Fox and you wanted to vote for a contestant, we could tally up the votes. I was a product manager there. So, going from a non-technical background as an econ major into a software startup, that was a rough transition. Happy to share my experience there. But needless to say, I had a very bad 1-year review at that company. And They kept me on. I didn't get fired or anything, but I would say that that review really shaped me and really lit the fire under me to like, go figure out what I needed to fill my skill gaps, which were largely technical skill gaps. Um, so after that, moved out to California, got a job at Box.com. So worked for Aaron Levy, who's to this day one of my favorite entrepreneurs. He was an amazing guy to work for. I think about him and his leadership style all the time. After Box, went to SurveyMonkey, and was there for a while as well. I'd say when I was at Box and SurveyMonkey, I was kind of the same role, which is you have these big cloud freemium models. How do you mine the freemium base to try to extract enterprise sales signal, get them into the right marketing funnel, whether that's an online sales or enterprise sales motion. So I was on the growth team at SurveyMonkey, which was largely modeled after Facebook's growth team. So it was kind of constant experiments in the product, lots of pricing tests, stuff like that. So got an appreciation for this sort of testing culture there.
Yeah, the whole kind of iteration. I mean, that's, I think a lot of people don't totally appreciate that. Who, if you're not really in the tech industry, just how much, whether it's all the tech companies, but Facebook, Google, just like this kind of like test, learn, adapt,
Yeah.
implement, change. It just this constant testing, it failing, iterating, improving, and not being afraid to fail. I mean, there's something special about that culture that I think more conservative cultures don't necessarily get.
Yeah, I agree. And there was a very close tie between Facebook and SurveyMonkey. The former CEO of SurveyMonkey is a guy named Dave Goldberg, who was married to Sheryl Sandberg. And unfortunately, Dave actually tragically passed away while he was CEO of SurveyMonkey. But there've always been these close ties. I think Sheryl Sandberg was one of the biggest shareholders of SurveyMonkey, and a lot of the kind of best practices that they developed at Facebook ended up trickling into SurveyMonkey in various ways. But I think, to your point, one of them was this sort of fail fast, test everything. And obviously, SurveyMonkey doesn't have the scale of a Facebook, but in terms of the different things we were willing to test and sort of the cultural acceptance of doing that, was definitely there. So loved that. After SurveyMonkey, I was out in California for about 7 years, decided to come back to Austin with sort of that scar tissue from that annual review not being technical enough. And really the intention coming back, this was around COVID, partly a lifestyle change, and then partly just I felt like I had really developed a skill set that I wanted to come back and apply it. And for me, that meant getting back into startups. So moved back here, was kind of doing some networking, but actually met a guy, just a cold email of a founder here in Austin who was starting a company. And it was sort of, the idea was to build a modern business brokerage. And sort of the tailwind or the trend that he was seeing was there's this wealth transfer going on between the baby boomers and the next generation, and there's basically this massive glut of assets that need to get passed on. And sort of the theory is, and I'm sure you're well aware of all of this, is do those businesses, these Main Street businesses, service businesses, independent companies, do they get gobbled up by private equity, or do they find a new owner operator, and kind of what are the implications of that? So we started a business brokerage. It was called Beacon. I came on to run marketing, but eventually ended up becoming the general manager of that business unit. Our founder had gone off to start a buy side service offering. So we were kind of I was on the sell side, he was on the buy side. Long story short, he won out, and that company's now fully focused on the buy side. Some of my old team is still around, but that's now a buy side fund called American Operator. And then, but basically one of the big lessons I learned while building Beacon, and we were talking to a lot of American business owners, was kind of, I was really surprised the really the information asymmetry that we discovered, in so much as we met a lot of owners who've been working in their businesses for decades, really, really skilled operators. Then there's some sort of life event, and they haven't really taken the time, mostly because they're so involved in the day-to-day of the business, to take a step back. What's the succession plan? How much is this asset worth? And then there's some sort of triggering event. It could be health or otherwise, or partner dispute, divorce, that all of a sudden triggers a sale and they're caught flat-footed. But
Yeah.
the insight was like, this is making up for these owners the vast majority of their net worth, and they're not doing the best job tracking it or managing it to the desired outcome. So all this is to say, I left Beacon and started a company called Halcyon. The whole goal of our company is to reduce this information asymmetry between the buy side, private equity, and others, and the sell side, the owner operators in America. And the way we're doing that is by making business valuation insights really easy to access, really easy to consume, and really easy to revisit. So we've built a technology that basically democratizes valuation insights to private owners. We've been at it for about 2 years now, and it's been super fun.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing story, amazing journey. And there's a couple of, call it similarities or synergies. Not many people know this, but when I was in eighth grade, I ran an AAU nationals, and I placed, like, I think sixth or seventh in the 400 when I was in eighth grade in Pomona, California. It was like my
Yeah.
first plane trip. I think, and I don't even know how the hell my dad was able to afford it. We figured it out. And then when I was in high school, I was on the Indiana State Championship 4x100. I was the first leg,
Yeah.
and we and I was moderately fast, obviously, but our anchor, the fourth leg, or the anchor of the relay, he was a state champion in the 100 and 200 for like 2 or 3 years. So he was really, really fast, and that helped. But I think people don't appreciate the discipline and the routine and
That's
just
right.
all the thing that I think just lays the foundation for being a good, call it corporate athlete or big CEO athlete. But what, in your experiences, what are some similarities? And by the way, you mentioned to me, but how fast did you run the mile? By the way, I think you kind of skipped over that. I remember you
Yeah.
mentioned to me, I was
Yeah.
blown away, but how fast did you run the mile?
Well, it's one of my great life regrets. I did not break 4 minutes, but I was decently close. I ran a 4:07 was my personal record.
And like, so everybody just too who's listening here, for many, and correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony, but like, for centuries, many times, the big thing was to beat a 4-minute mile. Like,
Yeah.
that was like just like the biggest thing ever. And then they were able to beat it, but it's not like it's been, they beat a ton. And then I think recently somebody hit the record or
Yeah.
whatever. But amazing accomplishment,
Yeah.
Anthony. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I digress a little bit, but what are some of the, we call it, the
No.
ties and experiences that you see there?
Yeah. And I would say, and just for some context, I've been thinking about college a lot recently, and it's been a long time ago for me. But the reason is because we just hired 2 engineers, and we're now a team of 3, and they're both new grads from college. So I've been trying to take myself back to that time in life. But I would say, like, the in terms of what I've drawn from that experience and what I feel like I'm applying today, it's just what you said. It's basically just the ability to keep showing up every single day. And, there's a goal in mind, and you're tracking that goal. And I think that's the other interesting thing about track, is it's really easy to quantify. And so even back when I was doing it, everyone was keeping logs of distances and times and workouts and all this stuff. And so the value of tracking things is, that's another maybe more tactical thing that I apply today. Um, Definitely want to get into that about, all the stuff we're tracking and the AI loops and stuff we're using for that. But I think it's really just, you got to show up. You're not going to feel good most of the time, but you show up because you have a goal in mind and you need to accomplish that. Track is an individual sport, but you're part of a team. There's different events, and it's not just distance running. You are a sprinter. So there's camaraderie, whether it's a relay or a totally different event like throws, javelin, totally different body types. Um,
Totally.
and just being part of that environment and really just appreciating other people who are all trying to contribute to this team, but doing so in an individual way, I think is kind of an interesting dynamic from the sport. But really what it is just pain tolerance. And I think it's the only thing when I was younger where it was like something I consistently did. You're only taking a class for a semester and then you're off to the next thing. But this is something every single year where it's basically this constant pain in your life, and hopefully you're getting payoff. But I think it's good for you, especially as a young person.
And look, that I don't think like running the 400 is like, I think it's the hardest race because like you run and it's like you get to that last 100 and you're like, oh, like, and you got to
Yeah,
push through. I mean, that's the other thing. There's adversity, and you got to kind of stay focused and push through it. And life, that's a bit of life, right? I mean, you have
yeah.
adversity, kind of stick and you put. Okay, so all right, so so you got a startup, 2 years old now.
hmm
Uh, what what's the big goal that you have? I mean, you talk about track and athlete. Like, what's the big goal you have?
Yeah. So, I'm sure you talk to your founders all the time. I think the overarching goal, I'd say our mission is really just to kind of close this gap that kind of I encountered at my last company, which there's these great owners who are working really hard. This is really important for their communities, their lives, their families. But they're so in the weeds as an operator that they basically don't realize a lot of the value of their hard work. And I think that's wrong. And so I think with better planning, they can, basically realize their impact a little bit better, all the value that they've created in their communities for their employees, customers, et cetera. So that's the real mission of the company, is kind of to close that gap a little bit. Uh, the way we're doing it is not through the owner directly. One of the insights I had at my last company is it's really hard to, they're, call it 3 million American owner operators. These are owners of companies with at least two employees. So there are a lot out there. Um, and so if we really want to have our impact, it's kind of hard to reach all those people. It's expensive. I learned that lesson the hard way. Uh, what we're doing is we're basically building technology for the advisor layer. So owners, they're typically working with an attorney. They're definitely working with a CPA, whether it's in-house finance or an outside bookkeeper CPA firm, uh, potentially a wealth advisor as well. So there are all these different folks who are kind of serving as trusted advisors to the owner and are used
Yeah.
to giving that owner advice in different ways. And so those folks are our customers. So they're using that CPA is implementing Halcyon at the account level. They've got different people who are providing business valuations to their clients, but it's all managed, at the enterprise level where we're able to generate and manage all these different instances of valuations for all the clients within the firm.
And then as a owner operator, right? You want, you have this thing that you're built, but you're busy. You don't always can understand, hey, what is this thing worth? How do I value it? What data? You're getting advice from different people. You want to get the right advice. And it's like, you correct me if I'm wrong, it's not always been easy to get, or the accuracy hasn't been there. It hasn't always been top of mind. Is that
Yeah.
is that true, or what would you say? What would you add to that?
Yeah. And I know you do a lot of valuation work when you're doing
Totally.
investments. I think it's probably even harder for what you do because you're looking at these super high growth young companies and you're kind of sticking
And
your
new
finger up in
models,
the
right? And
air.
somewhat new models
Totally
too,
new
right? I mean,
models.
yeah.
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 So that's very, very hard. And I'm sure I want to hear your philosophy, but I'm sure it comes down to the founding team, the grit. If they're not going to hit it on this idea, what's the likelihood that they can pivot and find something based on who they are? Uh, so that's a whole different thing. But for a lot of these more established businesses, more established industries, they're not crazy growth. They might be, there's exceptions to every rule, but we're talking single digit. Maybe it's a really good business growing 10 to 15% a year. Um,
Yeah.
and these are industries where there are lots of different benchmarks, tons of M&A going on all the time. And so for us, the way we've built it, and the reason owners aren't doing this today, I have a few different theories. Like, one is expensive because it's kind of done where, I as the owner, I have to show the initiative to do this. Um, it's not always obvious unless there's some sort of forcing event, and it's painful to do proactively because it's usually 15 grand or more. I have to give you my books. I expose myself. There's sort of some risk involved where I might have to talk to my CPA or my CFO, and then they're going to wonder why I'm doing this. Like, am I selling the business? No, I'm just planning. So there are all these kind of little operational friction points, which of course we spent a lot of time trying to solve. Um, so I think the intake is one of the things, but then I think the other thing is just the benchmarking is really hard too. And so that's another area we're really focused on. But we've been obviously using technology, using AI where we can to figure this out, and we've been making some real progress.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And we'll keep an eye on the business. It's an exciting space. Value and valuation is it's imperative, whether you're in my business, your business, you're a business owner, and not only like understanding the value, but increasing the value. It's a vital space. So we'll definitely keep an eye on the business there, Anthony. All right. So exponential growth is what, what we like for the audience is like, you have a unique lens, right? You have a life lens, you have a track lens, you have a brown lens, you have a lens that worked at a couple, handful of startups. By the way, Box, right? These guys
Mhm.
at Box, we use Box at Analyst. They are like, they want to cross sell and upsell. I can't think go a week without these people that. So if anybody's listening to this from Box, you guys are animals at like cross
Yeah.
selling and upselling.
Yeah.
Almost a borderline annoying, but I'll give it to them. But so our audience, they come to this podcast, they want to like, what from your lens, what do you see are the big exponential trends that they should keep their eye on from what you're seeing? Would love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, I'd say so. So I think the big thing that I've been thinking more about is this idea of loops, where it's basically, I was reading this article. Maybe you read this one of when Jack Dorsey did the big shakeup at Block, and it resulted in big layoffs. But this idea of like a super flat organization, enabled through AI and other things, but just like basically, what does it look like to remove the middle management layer? Um, so, we're a very small company, so we don't have this layer. But I think the basic premise that Jack Dorsey is talking about is like, if you work at a company, it doesn't necessarily need to be a tech company. We're in this age where you can generate all this signal, whether it's, we're on a Zoom call right now that's getting recorded. Everything you do should get recorded and centralized so that you can action off of it. And so this is one thing I'm trying to do. And, we've got these two engineers and they want more feedback to inform what they're building. And so, how do I do that? I just make certain that all of my calls get recorded so that they can read what my actual sales interactions are, their trends, patterns, and those will result in product requirements that we build. And then we can reach out to that individual and close the loop and hopefully close the sale. So that's one thing I'm really interested in. And I think it's really easy for us because we're such a small team. It's really easy to make changes quickly. But, just setting up these feedback loops. And I think for bigger businesses, especially, where can you extract signal from certain parts of your business? If you can use technology for that, amazing. And then deliver it to other parts. And I think that's kind of the bet that Jack Dorsey's making. And that, I'm very interested in that trend.
Yeah, that's one also. And what I a couple of months ago or so started hearing about Y Combinator, and then the amount of like one person startups that
Yeah.
as a percentage, I want to say like it's some 50, 60% or something like that and that's going to continue to grow, right, over time. And so you're seeing this number of one-person startups growing, and they're powered by AI agents that are doing different functions, and it's all automated with AI, and then this whole concept of loops. I didn't even really hear that word for, I don't know. The concept's been around a while, but just the word maybe 6 months ago, 7 months ago, and it's just between like redoing automation, but it's also like a bit of like leverage too, right? I think they're using it in the context of financial leverage. So I agree, and I think people, those who are listening to this, whether you're in a big company, right? Think about all the amount of layers that can be removed through automation and agents. But if you're a startup founder too, you shouldn't be thinking about big teams. You should be thinking about, agents, and why do you need people, and and how are you leveraging tech to grow. So I think that I wholeheartedly, I'm a big believer in that first trend. Anthony, what else you seeing? What else you see out there that you think is important for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of, I'll give my perspective because you were describing sort of the solo YC founder, and that's certainly how I felt for a while. And, I think the best thing about that stage was just a lot of your founders, a lot of your investments, I'm sure they've gone through a number of pivots. And I think the best thing about that for me was just, I didn't feel the pain of the pivot because I was like doing it myself, and there's no sort of organizational momentum when you have to change directions. So, to tie that to a trend, I think one thing that we found to be very valuable that I hope to continue even as we grow and add employees is, kind of back to the SurveyMonkey Facebook thing, is like the test culture. And I'd say one of the things that we've found to be really easy and really helpful for us is the ability to go out and test ideas at a really low cost. The way we're practically doing that, because we're a software startup, is we're always prototyping. We're always making these little mocks, prototypes, either on Claude Code or Lovable. And then, over time, we've built up sort of our CRM of folks who are not necessarily customers, but just people who are kind of investing in us along the way. And we'll just go out and kind of flash a prototype, a Lovable mock-up or something to them, and they'll say, okay, you're on track or you're not. And I really like that style of development. And I think that is probably here to stay for high-performing organizations, is how do you get low-cost feedback? I guess it's back to the loops idea. How can you do that as rapidly as possible before you invest and double down and, actually throw it over to not just the agents, but the real, production code engineers? I really like that trend. And that's been really fun for me.
And I think that trend, whether you're in a position in corporate or a startup founder, I think it's very applicable, right? How do you test something or put something out there, low cost, high feedback, leverage tech for it, and to win it. And guess what? If you're not doing it, your competitors are gonna, and if they're doing it well, you're not gonna be in business much longer, right? So it's an important,
right.
it's an important function. So Anthony,
right.
those are good kind of trends. Now the other part we talk about in Exponential is investing, right? You've got an interesting investing background, whether it's investing capital as a CEO founder, you're getting investment, or you're pitching for investment as a founder. So you kind of got the both capitals, but you also have other investment, experiences that maybe you can share with that. When you were in times of really crazy times of a lot of exponential growth change, what would you tell our audience, just based on your lens on investing, right? The CEO, the founder, having some other investments that you manage. What would you share, just a couple insights that you can share to help them in these times of exponential growth?
Yeah. So I don't know if I have the best advice here, but I'll just start talking and we'll see if something lands. I guess the first thing I can definitely respond to is just us as a company and our fundraising situation. We're actually bootstrapped so far. So and that's been, I don't know if you know any investors or anything, but at some point we might be fundraising. Uh, but I think the bootstrapping has actually been a huge asset to us right now because that capital constraint has really made a lot of these decisions that I make on a day-to-day business, day-to-day basis feel a lot more acute, and I'm really forced to weigh the trade-off where, we'll say my last company where we were a little bit better capitalized, I wasn't always thinking that way. So that's been one thing, and I think obviously at a certain point we'll once we strike upon the business model and feel good about our sales playbooks and all those things, we'll probably want to go out and raise. But I would say that's been fun for me early on, kind of just operating in a bootstrap company. Um, Investment, I'd say in general, obviously I'm pretty risk on. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing, bootstrapping and not drawing a salary. Uh, so I would say, for me personally, I've tried to balance my risk on with the business with a fairly less risk on outside portfolio. I wouldn't say I've made a terrible number of private investments, although I guess I've got exposure in various ways, but direct investments, I should say. Um, One of my hot takes that I think would be fun to talk about is I think a lot of software public equities are oversold at this point. Um, I think there are some companies that are really great enterprise sales companies that are really. I think there was this thing, what, like a year and a half ago, where everyone's like, "I'm going to
The
vibe
SaaS
code my."
apocalypse, like about
Yeah,
a
that
year
SaaS
ago, about a
apocalypse.
year
I'm going
ago.
to
Yeah.
vibe code a CRM or an ERP, and like I don't
Yeah.
think we've seen that happen. So if there's, now that we know, I'm fairly confident for these really big enterprise software players. No one's trying to vibe code this stuff. So, maybe there's some value still of the oversale that occurred. But that I think that's my only hot take right now.
Oh, it's funny. Yeah. I mean, and look, I grew up in the implementing ERPs, which are
Yeah,
enterprise resource planning for
yeah.
those who aren't. These are these big systems that run human resources that are the guts of every financial transaction, every sales customer, every inventory product, like these systems that have all this stuff and they've been built over many years and they have many nuance. Yeah. Look, I'm a big AI person. I get it. But a lot of people, oh yeah, just AI, oh, it can call it, and it's gonna like and maintain it and maintain the
Yeah, that's
security
right.
and if something breaks, who's gonna fix it? So I
Yeah.
think it was very overblown, and in companies like Salesforce, I tend to agree with you. That now I think some of them too, and it depends, right? Adobe, they're not as much in the guts of they create some
Hmm.
graphical stuff. I think that might be a little bit more exposed.
Hmm.
But the stuff I call it the enterprise resource with the day, I think it's but it's an interesting time. We'll see how it plays out. So tend to agree with you there, Anthony.
Yeah, and I think to the extent you would be bearish on a company like Salesforce, the reason I would be bearish isn't so much that your large enterprise customer bases are going to build and maintain their own CRMs. That's, in my opinion, a bad business decision, even if you have great engineers and resources for it. Why not focus on what you're good at? Focus on what makes your beer taste better, that the classic saying. But to the extent there's pressure on these companies is because obviously Salesforce and others have a great business model. They make a lot of money, and so you as a startup, folks like me with a couple engineers in a small office, you're going to pursue the attractive categories, and if you can be AI native, super agentic, maybe you can start chipping away at these attractive categories. Of course, Salesforce is also just going to acquire everyone that they want to acquire. So it's kind of an interesting thing to watch and follow. But yeah.
Cool. No, it's a good perspective for our listeners, on investing. I guess the other thing that I'm just, that I'm AI and chips and stuff like that, right? I mean, there's a whole, it's a, I've been of late reading a lot of stuff, just the chip demand, right?
Hmm.
There's the demand for AI, the demand for chips, it just continues, and it's not because the chips have taken a little bit of a hit, but that's there's a lot of there's un what they what's the word insatiable demand,
Hmm.
and even into the future, right? For that AI is causing, because they said something like roughly like 1 to 5% are really using AI on a regular basis, right? And then even companies, it's somewhat the same thing, right? And this is really not even like where agents, like I think, where agents are transacting all the time. And so when you start doing those projections, and I think the big players have done those projections, right? The Amazons, the Googles,
Hmm.
uh, and this is why they're doing all this capital expenditures that Wall Street's going, oh, this capital expenditure, this stuff is crazy, and they're getting hit and penalized. But I think they're seeing a world where there's going to be a lot of there's just so much demand for these AI transactions, and you need chips and you need energy and all that. So I think that's an area that people should just keep an eye on, and this is kind of why I do this podcast, because I'm just trying to say, look,
Yeah.
the stuff isn't, if you think the stuff is slowing down, it's not.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the other thing I'm fascinated by is like some of the chips and the materials. That's uh, that's more of an obvious second order effect. Effect of this big, capex to the tune of trillions of dollars in data centers. But what are the third and fourth order effects? Um, I haven't spent enough time researching this, but I'm sure there's some interesting stuff to find there. Uh, in fact, I saw a funny story about, I guess you can purchase there's a market for live monkeys, and the rate to purchase a monkey has gone up considerably. And the reason is because now with, AI pharmaceutical development, they're trying to test more on monkeys. And so labs are trying to acquire monkeys so that they can run the tests that the AI models have flagged as promising development. So like stuff like that, I just is it's entertaining, but there's probably also ways of finding some good investments in there.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's a whole nother podcast and stuff. But like the whole kind of AI and health and running
Yeah.
models and medicine, I mean, that's a whole another big area. Okay, so now the last part we always like is like leadership, right? So you're not, you have a couple different leadership thing. You've been
Hmm.
a leader in part of companies. You even, you've had to pivot in your
Hmm.
career a bit. You lead in other areas as well, even outside of your CEO role right now. What in these times of exponential growth, change, disruption, what are some leadership principles that you like to share with the audience?
Well, I think the first thing that I've gained an appreciation for recently with our new hires is I really think having just I'm sure there's some principles that we can talk through. I'd love to hear your leadership principles, but I think for me with our team, like what I think about a lot is just the individual, and like, it's as far as your vision for the company and all of that, uh you know that's important, but a lot of my day to day is just like coaching individuals, trying to understand what they care about, what their incentives are, and then playing to those things. So my first tip would be that it's not one size fits all, and that you need to understand at the individual level what gets people going, what motivates them. That's a little bit of a cliche, but I guess in terms of the leadership style that I've always respected and that I try to model myself after is just like, especially at a startup, it's just hard work, like being in the trenches. We have a very small office. We're in person. So just trying to show up every day, making certain that my team's hearing all of my sales calls, that they understand like, what people are saying about our product. But really it's just, bringing my energy to work as much as I can. Um, and, I think the other thing that gets talked a lot of on these tech podcasts is sort of the idea of the man in the arena. That's the Teddy Roosevelt. That's kind of the style of leadership of just like being willing to put yourself out there, make mistakes. What's the worst that can happen? You have to pivot. You wouldn't be the first. But just being honest about things, communicative, transparent, and then really understanding your team down to the individual level where you're not just speaking in cliches, where it's like, I know this person cares about this. And so that's how I'm going to approach and frame my conversations with this individual.
Yeah, I love that. I love the Teddy Roosevelt thing, right? There was I think it was on History Channel. They had his bio and all that kind of stuff, and phenomenal. And then now I'm like wanting to go to the Dakotas where his presidential library is, and check that out. But that's I'll go start there and work backwards. I think putting yourself out there, like is like this podcast, right? I make mistakes. It's not perfect. There's little things in there, but you gotta, and it goes back to even the survey. You gotta try something, test it, see if it works. And it's also, I think, to our track roots, it's like you're continuously improving. Because I'm sure you ran a 6-minute mile, then you ran a 5-minute mile, then you're training and you're doing, and you're trying something with your workouts and here and there. So I think that is definitely something that I think is important. To your first point, I think it's vital, right? That's probably like one of because it's a when you have teams and you're leading, like you want that person to be like, call it like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Where
Yeah,
you're at the very top
that's
and
right.
you're coming to work every day and you're the happiest, you're the most motivated, you feel like you're feeling your life's purpose. You want to help. You don't even feel like it's work. You're just in it, and you're gonna, you don't even need to be told what to do. You just need somewhat direction, but you're just loving it. It doesn't feel like work. You'll work a weekend, you'll work an evening, whatever. Obviously, you don't want to work too much, but I think that is a vital part. And I don't think it doesn't matter what technology comes from now for the foreseeable future. Humans are going to always want that. So I think that's a
Yeah.
great
I,
a great part.
Yeah, I've never really thought about it, but self-actualization is at the top of the hierarchy, right? And so that's been the most fun thing for me in the last few years is, we're both very fortunate where everything on the bottom rungs have pretty much always been in place, at least for me personally, shelter, food, all those things, sense of belonging. But I feel like, this recent journey where I've finally taken the jump to be a founder, that's where I've started to get to that self-actualization. And so if I can share some of that with my team and in turn that gets them motivated, then I think that will, I'll consider that a win from a leadership standpoint. And yeah.
Well, look, it makes work fun. It makes life fun, right? I mean, look, we wake up every day. We want to make a contribution to society, a contribution to the world. You're doing it with people. You're doing it with a team. You all want to wake up, right, feeling that, hey, we're loving what we're doing. We're in this direction. And you look at a lot of these major companies, right? This is why they focus on culture so much, right? And just like, what is the culture? What do we believe in? And all that kind of stuff. So it's an important leadership principles there, Anthony. I
Yeah.
think stand the test of time.
Yeah.
Anything as it relates to exponential growth in those three areas you want to leave our audience with before we drop?
No, I mean, I think if there's one thing I would leave you with, it's just like the willingness and the love to test. And I think it's easy for me in my situation right now with our team and the fact that we don't have a ton of customers, but that's something that when we start to grow and scale, that's something that I'm going to remind myself of. And so um, it's such a fun time right now. There's so many different things you can do, and especially in business models where there are things that are working or things that are known that need to be fixed. It's like, just come up with a theory, make your prototype, collect your signal, start running these tests, figure out what you can do, and yeah, it should be really fun. So thanks for having me. This is my first podcast, but I listen to a lot of podcasts, so it's kind of fun to be part of one.
Well, you'll be on more, and like the good news is we have this thing kind of etched and recorded, so that when you make it big and your startup becomes a unicorn, we can go back to this being the first one, and go from there. And how do people keep in touch with your company and you? Where how do
Yeah.
they follow you?
Yeah, so I'm on X or Twitter, Anthony Shers, Schurz. Our company's called Halcyon. We didn't get the .com, although I'm negotiating with a domain broker right now, but we're halcyon.us, Halcyon. So yeah, just follow us and reach out if you got any ideas, but this has been really fun.
Anthony, hey, well, thanks. I know you got a lot going on, so thanks for making it a priority to come on the pod. Look forward to having you on in the future. Maybe in a year or so, we'll come back and kind of see how things are going, and all the changes that are going on. So we'll take it from there.
That'd
But
be
Anthony,
fun.
thanks, man. Appreciate you
I'll
jumping on the pod.
develop more. I'll develop more hot takes, and we'll have to see what the Salesforce price is around then.
There we go. Yeah, we'll have it recorded. It'll be a good one to come back to. All right, Anthony, have a good one. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, David. Bye.